My task is to set the scene. Why revisit Carmahome almost 100 years after it was first investigated? And to answer this question, we should begin with the various research frameworks and strategic directions, and in particular with the Boyne to Brodgar initiative. Boyne to Brodgar aims to improve and promote our understanding of the Neolithic monuments that are found across Scotland, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. It is a unique blend of serious and considered archaeological research framework with an enthusiastic and joyous celebration of our shared cultural heritage. Boyne to Brodgar, alongside Scotland's archaeological research framework and Scotland's archaeology strategy, provides the wider context and direction and very much deserves a positive response. One such response is the Awakening Sleeping Giants archaeological route map that was drawn up by Dr. Gavin McGregor in 2022. This is an open archaeological proposal rooted in innovative practice, a considered local action research programme for the Isle of Arran that was developed in consultation with a wide range of different stakeholders. The route map prepares potential research actions, suggests possible creative responses and learning activities, and looks to integrate and enhance the visitor experience across a range of different sites. It provides a solid foundation for future archaeological research project planning in regards to Arran's fascinating Neolithic heritage. And in itself, it represents a new process of project design that is informed by and contributes to Scotland's archaeology strategy. Forestry Land Scotland's response, Boyne to Brodgar's call to action, is best described as the bare bones thematic focus. This acts to collate previous work, present a diverse collection of monuments that many are way off the beaten track, and support a range of current projects. Previous work includes many different archaeological measured surveys on Scotland's National Forest estate, including the chambered tombs of Gortnahoolade, Achoish, Bargrennan, Bencalan, Giants Graves, Torrenloist, and Haley, to name a few. Current work includes the archaeological learning resource itself and supporting projects such as the artistic response to Giants Grave on Arran, the laser scanning of Aghanaglac in Northern Ireland, experiential archaeology at Tivbulia, the innovative co-creation of learning toolkits by Archaeology Scotland, there's one down there, financial support to enable the post-excavation and publication of legacy projects such as Lochhill and the Slough Cairn in Dumfriesshire, and the re-evaluation of the simple passage tomb of Carmahome on Arran. And it is this last project that is the subject of today's paper. And in returning to Carmahome, we hope to contribute to several key research questions with one simple action: date its construction. Handing over to Clare.
So the Carmahome passage tomb can be found on the Isle of Arran on the southwest side. So you can see it's here by the red arrow. It was located now in commercial forestry land, and originally it was set on the southwest facing slope of Ben Tarsoon, and it's located just at the point. So when you see it from near the shore, it would have been just silhouetted against the top of the hill. There you go. The passage tomb lies within a landscape rich in archaeological features, many of which were explored by Barber and his team in the 1990s. And this work was done to inform future forestry planting policies in upland areas. They excavated a number of burial cairns in the complex, and this one in particular, 1613, is quite similar in terms of its history to Carmahome, in that it had a primary Neolithic burial located in a simple pit over which an earthen barrow was then placed, and then it was enlarged in the Chalcolithic period into a large and imposing cairn. And Barber, they've done a huge amount of work in this area, and there's lots of evidence for Neolithic activity. They didn't find Neolithic settlements, but there's lots of evidence for Neolithic activity in the area in lithics and charcoal material. And interesting with this cairn as well, they found a single vood vessel and beaker broken over the top of the cairn. So what were our aims and objectives at Carmahome? Well, as Matt said, really, our primary aim was to contribute to further understanding these rare Neolithic monuments. And we would achieve this by obtaining radiocarbon dates from the monument. That was our hope anyway, either from within the monument or under the monument, if there were buried soils surviving under the monument. And also one of the other aims was just to look at the general effect that forestry had on this monument. So just a bit of sort of background. Sheridan and Sholting in 2020, they've argued that the handful of small megalithic tombs with either a passage or a chamber or an enclosed chamber, which are encased in cairn material, started to appear on the west coast of Scotland around about 4000 BC. They argue that these are Breton-style monuments, and they were introduced into west coast of Scotland by the first farmers who came up from the Morbidun region in Brittany. And this is one example that's in Argyll, excavated by Matt's parents. And basically the idea is here that it started off as a closed chamber tomb, and then there's a later passage tomb placed into this monument. And Allison and Sholting argue that this dates to around, the passage tomb dates around about 37th century BC. However, there is a problem. Is that the pointer? No, oh, yeah, there it is. These are the various tombs that they argue are early first sort of farmers, or the first sort of generations of farms coming in that built these monuments in the west coast of Scotland. But the problem we have is only one's been dated, and that was recently dated on human cremated remains. And you can see it comes back to a fairly sort of early-ish Neolithic date. But none of the other ones in this diagram have been dated. So a lot of the argument is based on sort of comparing the typology, the architectural design of these monuments. So as Matt mentioned, the Carmahome was previously excavated around about 100 years ago now. And the monument measured around 5.3 by 5.4 meters in diameter with a passage. As you can see, so it had basically the cairn material, had an outer ring of curb stones, and then it had an inner chamber, and then it had a passage. And this is the sole drawing from their excavations, and then a reconstruction of what it may have looked like. When they excavated it, there was no capstone surviving at all. There's about a meter's worth of peat within the chamber, which they took out, and they found, you can see there's 3 sort of stones shown, and it was a flagstone floor. They reportedly took up the medium stone, which I think must be stone C, looked underneath, found very little, just found 1 flint flake. They cleared off some of the peat over the actual cairn material to find the outer curbs, and they concluded that the passage tomb had been robbed in antiquity. So to be honest, when we revisited, we weren't holding out much hope of getting very much information from it at all. Oh. There you go. So this is what the monument like when we first took off the vegetation and a little bit of soil. So you can see this is the passage coming in here, and this is the central chamber, and then you can see all the cairn material around. And this is our plan of the site as well. And again, there's a passage, central chamber, and you can see the curbstones coming around. So what we discovered underneath the monument, there was a very small, irregular, kidney-shaped pit. And you can see this is before it was excavated. Here's a little bit of human bone remaining. We got 6.1 grams of a human bone from this pit, and it was, when we excavated it, it was almost dissolving as we watched it. So we had to leave the sample to dry and then extract it once it was dry, because we couldn't just wet sieve it because it would have totally disappeared. And we got a little bit of cranial bone and a single fragment of a molar tooth. That was really the only identifiable bone from that. We did try and radiocarbon date it, but there wasn't enough carbon surviving to be able to date it. But we did get a radiocarbon date on hazel from that pit, and you can see it actually gave quite a late date here, which is quite surprising because we were hoping for about 4000 BC, and obviously that's almost 1,000 years later. So it's possible, over sealing this pit was a buried soil. It's been obviously disturbed. And it's possible that some of that charcoal from the buried soil got into this pit. So we're not actually dating that primary burial. But we'll see later on, I'm fairly convinced this is quite a late pit anyway, but we'll look at that evidence later on in the talk. So we also found, what we did is, this is the central chamber here, and these are the back of the chamber stones. We cut a slot through the cairn material from the chamber right through to this curbstones. So this curbstone wasn't visible from the surface. We actually found that when we were excavating. And you can see here, we're just going to talk now about these buried soils under the cairn material itself. So this section is this one here, and this one is this section here. And you can see both sides, you've actually got undisturbed soil horizons surviving under the cairn material. Dr. Susan Ramsey and Professor Emma Jenkins, Susan's done the pollen, Emma the phytolith analysis, and we discovered that basically the monument was built in a damp, over the top of a damp meadow environment, very much like this. So you've got bits of heather, you've got devil bit scabious and lots of grasses. We found some buried turf that had actually been used to pack one of the curbstones, and that showed even more evidence of grassland, which very, very likely to have been actually grazed grassland. So you can imagine this is basically very rich meadowland, presumably used during the Neolithic period as grazing land. We had hazel charcoal in both the buried soils, and that was quite curious because there was no nearby immediate forestry in the area of these meadows at this time. So I'm just wondering, and again, I've got to talk with Susan about this, I've not had time to catch up with her yet, but I'm wondering if that's evidence either of middening, we talked about that earlier before, you know, adding midden material to soils. That's probably more unlikely if it's meadowland. And it might actually be that this is the residue of hearths of the tomb builders actually themselves having their fires as they're constructing the monument, and maybe that the charcoals actually come in from them having their, you know, keeping themselves warm and cooking their dinner while they're building the monument. So we'll have to see what Susan thinks of that idea. So I'll just go through now the actual structure itself. So this is images of the internal chamber. It was roughly 1.34 meters wide by 1.4 meters and was constructed from 8 tightly packed cream sandstone orthostats. They were at different heights. You can see it's not particularly level. And I think that's key when we come on later on to talk about what's happened to the monument. The sandstone's locally derived, and interestingly, you can see that some of the tops and edges are rounded. And I think it was basically the stone was prized off a open rock face somewhere nearby. So now to the passage. The passage was only 1.08 meters long, and it narrowed from the entrance, which is 0.84 meters wide, to 0.6 meters wide at the entrance where it actually entered into the chamber. So basically, you've got a single stone orthostat on one side, And then, sorry, I have to put my glass, getting old, I can never see properly now. And on the other side, we had a broken one. You can see it, sorry, here, you can see there's a broken orthostat there. The end of this orthostat was actually found underneath, going underneath the main slab here as well, which again will be important later on when we're having our discussion. So the central chamber was surrounded by a ring of curb stones, as you can see coming around here. They are set on a circle themselves, but the two portal stones are actually offset from that circle. And it creates this sort of curving facade to the entrance, which is similar to very much more impressive large chamber tombs that you see elsewhere, but it's still following that sort of pattern. So now to the internal deposits. So underneath this, we had that little pit, which we had Neolithic cremated remains in. And in here, this is now a crushed sandstone floor and soil mixture that have been deliberately placed up against and inside the chamber. Underneath that, this has actually been put on this buried soil within the chamber. And interestingly, the pollen analysis from the buried soil within the chamber showed there was a much higher level of pollen, high level of heather pollen in the chamber than out with. So the soil underneath the cairn had much less heather pollen. So I'm wondering whether they actually deliberately put heather, twigs of heather and stuff to make a nice dry floor within the chamber onto which they would then set their burials. And again, it's something I need to just talk to Susan about to see whether that's a plausible explanation. So after some time, they then decided to put in an extra layer of flooring, and then they've got this crushed sandstone material with soil in it. And just to note that there's this cut here coming through, which is a bit odd at the time, just didn't sort of fit in here, and we'll discuss that in a bit later on. Okay. So we had cremated material here. This is the flagstone floor, a later flagstone floor, and this cremated material here was under packing that being put flush with this flagstone floor, and you can see we've got the radiocarbon date here. This is a cremated bit of material surviving in the passage, again the same sort of date, and then this is cremation above packing, so it's after this second floor went in. So that gives us a bit of chronology and stratigraphy. Now, basically what we found was that this flagstone floor that man came down onto is again the second formalized floor in here, in this passage tomb. This is the top of the broken passage orthostat, and it lay under this stone here. So we got a good chronology here in that basically the tomb was used, then there was a period, probably only a couple of 100 years after it was originally constructed, there was a collapse of the tomb. This broke off, fell down. I think that this is actually part of a capstone. This is an orthostat inside that sits out with the circle of orthostats forming the chamber, and this one that's on the floor is the same scales. So I think this is stood up here. This was a capstone on the top. It's all collapsed in, and then they've cleverly managed to sort of, there would be no way they could lift it out, so they've rejigged it and created a higher floor within the passage tomb itself. That strange cut I showed you in the original floor, well, the second floor, the crushed sandstone floor, turned out that actually man hadn't actually lifted that stone. It's impossible for him to have lifted the flagstone. But what they had done was dug a little sondage right at the entrance into the chamber. They'd left us what at the time of excavation I was getting excited because I thought it was a really knackered pot. It wasn't. It was a tin can from 1920s. So they'd dug down, basically dug a hole, and then had a fumble underneath the stone, but hadn't actually removed it. Found their flint, and then left a tin can. So I was a bit disappointed by that. We did get a crushed pot, beaker pot from the rubble within and over the rubble in the passage tomb. So Alison Sheridan's reconstructed it here. This is the date it should come back. We haven't actually dated it itself, but it should be about this sort of date. We actually got that kind of date from the soil from within the Clare material. So that's a bit weird, but I think you can probably explain a lot of that. It was on Hazel we got the date, but the deposit that the sample we took was really full of oak charcoal. So I think either that's an insertion in the Chalcolithic period in the Clare material that we just didn't see the hole as we excavated through. We got it from the section here, or it could be that the in the Chalcolithic period they were bringing pyre material. Oaks burns really hot, so potentially they were bringing pyre material and either inserting little cremations and pyre material into the cairn, or just scattering over the top, and this material maybe has worked down, and that would explain why we're getting a relatively late date from what is actually a Neolithic monument. So yes, so to conclude, it is a late Neolithic, sort of early late Neolithic passage tomb. It was built over a damp meadow-like environment, which is probably grazed. It did collapse in the early part of its sort of life, really, and stratigraphically, the cremations show that it continued then on to be reused. We don't really know how long for. There wasn't that much material surviving, but enough to show that it certainly was probably gone out of use by the late Neolithic. Definitely had Chalcolithic reuse. And I think certainly from looking at these, it shows that you can't just use architecture and typology to say that all these sort of simple passage tombs are not necessarily early Neolithic in date. And what it does show, and I think it'd be a fantastic PhD or something for somebody to go and look at some of these monuments that have already been excavated and revisit them. And obviously there is material surviving in these monuments, and it would be a fantastic study to just try and get some dates and actually get a handle on, you know, is there any consistency in the dating of these tombs, these typologies, or, you know, was the idea, the design of these, it's sort of reused for sort of thousands of years. Okay, thank you very much.